Hi, it's Keith from the Evangelical Free Church, Stony Stratford, and we're continuing our series of short talks in the Gospel of Mark. And today we're looking at chapter 15, 1 to 15. A recap, first of all. The chief priests and the teachers of the law are convinced that Jesus has committed blasphemy. But they've got a problem. They can just about agree among themselves, but they now have to bring the Roman administration on board because they are an occupied country. It's quite interesting. In the Jewish hierarchy of religious leaders, they didn't all agree on how they related to the Romans. The Pharisees, well, you kept God's law and you kept your head down, that was it. The Sadducees, who were the chief priests, well, they were basically, let's do anything the Romans say for an easy life. Then you had another sort of faction, insurrectionists, who were basically trying to overthrow Rome. They may not have agreed on this, but they agreed on one thing: they wanted Jesus dead. In the second X-Men film, X2, I believe it's called, the two groups of mutants, although they have different views on how they relate to the rest of humanity. Magneto is convinced a war is coming. Professor Xavier believes that they can all coexist peacefully. When they come across an army general who wants to wipe them all out, well, they have to join forces, don't they? And sometimes you get in these situations unlikely bedfellows. And apart from the fact the Jews couldn't quite agree with themselves, now you've got the Romans brought into the mix as well. And the charge has changed. We note the first question that Jesus is asked by Pilate: "Are you king of the Jews?" asked Pilate, verse 2. It's now political. "Yes, it's as you say," Jesus replied. The Greek isn't easy here, and to be honest, you could phrase Jesus' answer as, that's one way of putting it. It's much more ambiguous than saying, well, yeah, you could say it that way. Yeah, you could say it that way, but you could say it another way. But the thing that amazes Pilate is that Jesus just won't defend himself. Now, Pilate starts to smell a rat. He's had a difficult relationship with the Jews. It's quite fascinating to look at how Pilate had got on or not got on with the Jews. He could be very ruthless at times. But he actually realizes that there's a problem here. He realizes that there's something else going on. Because he's worked out, if we look at verse 10, that Jesus has been handed over to him because the chief priests and the other religious leaders are jealous of him. He knows this is something rather than a political charge. And so he looks for a way out after smelling a rat. He appeals to tradition. Verse 6, it was custom at the feast to release a prisoner to the people requested. A man called Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. So Pilate thinks this will be a good opportunity. When the crowd asks for a prisoner to be released, what better to do than get rid of this tricky situation? So Pilate asks them, but the crowd had been stirred up by the religious leaders, and they asked for Barabbas to be released. Verse 12, "What then shall I do with the one you call the King of the Jews?" Pilate asked them. "Crucify him," they shouted. "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." Pilate's little scheme doesn't work. He could have released Jesus, but I suppose anything for a peaceful life. Because we read in verse 15, wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed over to be crucified. A Roman flogging could often kill a man, and crucifixion wasn't needed. But let's note something. after all this mess, the compromise, the lies, the anything for an easy life, politics of the situation. Barabbas, a murderer, a guilty man, walks completely free. How are we to understand it? Well, let's just turn to a letter Paul wrote to the Ephesian church, and he says this: "For it is by grace that you have been saved through faith. And this is not from yourselves, it is a gift of God." We don't do anything that deserves to be saved. Barabbas hadn't done anything. He was as guilty as sin, wasn't he, to take a phrase. He deserved to die for what he had done. He'd taken the life of another human being, at least one. But he gets what's not deserved, and that's grace. And we've been saved by grace when we turn to Jesus. And if we've got any misconceptions about that, we need to look at the next verse, verse 9. Not by works, so that no one can boast. It's something we sometimes find very hard. Surely there's something I can do to put myself right with God. The Bible gives it a big N-O, time after time. In the end, it's God's work that matters, not what we do. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to take a gospel, we've got some at the front of the church, and you're welcome to take one if you can't find a Bible to follow these talks around the house. They're completely free, and there's some other books you might find interesting there as well. Thanks for listening.